one of the most influential and long-lasting ideas that undergirds slavery was this idea of environmental determinism, sometimes called climate determinism. They're really largely interchangeable, although environmental encompasses other things such as food eaten and the like. Now, where this stems from really is way back again into the ancient world, which we can see it from Greek and also from Muslim philosophers and scientists at the time. Hippocrates, of course, the father of modern medicine, one of the very first medical textbooks ever authored was obviously by him. And he devoted a great portion of time to the effects of environment on the not just the physical appearance, but the common ailments, and also the personality traits and intellectual capabilities of certain populations. And he was so sure, actually, of how accurately one could determine these things simply through geography, that he references specifically in that book that one need not concern themselves with the accuracy. You can simply just go forward with these assumptions and just know for sure that they will be correct based on the food, climate, air, water, and that kind of environmental factors at play here. So how that applies to slavery is that there was a global understanding that warmer climates actually predisposed populations to laziness. And a lot of this was stemmed from the idea, like especially in Africa, that food was so available and plentiful that there was less biological imperative to go out and acquire it. There was less hunting involved. There was less effort involved with gathering, and of course it's very hot. And so in some of these desert climates, it was beneficial to move less. And it was these same arguments, of course, that later became one of the undergirding principles, along with malarial resistance, that supported the use of African slaves in southern states, Caribbean, West Indies, and even plantations along the coast in Africa. It was like, well, don't worry about it because, blacks are resistant to heat. I mean, they're from Africa. So where it gets particularly interesting, though, is where this is applied to personality and to intellectual characteristics. Now, this is just one of a series, a battery, if you will, of different kind of pseudo-scientific theories and even disciplines that emerged that were used principally to justify slavery. You had craniometry, physiognomy, phrenology, early forms of physical anthropology, and all of these sciences, using imaginary quotes, they inevitably found, of course, that blacks were inferior intellectually than Europeans, Anglo-Saxons, or what have you, white people. Although not all whites. The Irish Iberian, of course, was categorized at or oftentimes below the cognitive levels of Africans, owing in no small part then to the anti-Irish prejudices throughout the 20th century. But environment came to be used as well as a tool. Oh, well, blacks are naturally lazy because of their home country. And so slavery was a requirement in order for them to be industrious. And this is just another instance of trying to find answers to questions they don't know how to ask. So what we would understand as being a consequence of intergenerational social conditioning. That this institution of slavery itself is a depressing institution, that it disincentivizes hard work because you don't get to enjoy any rewards for it. So there's no incentive. If anything, it disincentivizes doing as little as possible in order to avoid notice, essentially. But of course, at the time, they didn't really understand this concept. So it was, it must be because they're from a hot climate. The air is different there. Or it was also used to explain physiological differences. There were theories at the time that blacks excreted different oils in their skin. There were theories that their blood was different, and all of these were attributed as adaptations to their environment. So it was used to justify slavery. It's used to also even used to justify segregation later on. But what's particularly interesting about environmental determinism is that it never died. One would think that, throughout, since its primary function and throughout most of American history was to justify slavery, that the eventual abolition of slavery would have done away with the theory. But actually it emerged again in reverse. During the 1970s especially, you had the Crest theory, and this was a series of reverse racism, where it was similar, let's say, to the Iceman theory and others that posited that white people were aggressive because of experiences during the Ice Age. So because, I guess, white so-called races had to be very aggressive in the acclimation and acquisition of food and resources, that somehow wired us to be aggressive later on. So you essentially have a resurrection of an ancient pseudoscience, and just like it was used early in the life of the country, it was used to kind of racially profile entire groups of people. So it's interesting to note that this theory never died. And one of the things that I think makes it so persistent is that there are elements of truth to it, and that certain adaptations are made in behavior in response to our environment. But these are cultural and social factors. These are not anything to do with race, of course, which, kind of like environmental determinism, you would hope that the advent of science would destroy these things, and instead, like back then, it was kind of landscaped in just such a way that it fits a preformed thesis, a preformed agenda. So environmental determinism still, usually alongside the Aristotelian concepts of natural slavery, became one of the primary arguments presented by pro-slavery activists, especially in the South. You figure, that one of the unique climate to the South, is your subtropical kind of swamp, would be, if one was ascribed to environmental determinism, the ideal environment for blacks, most closely approximating their natural environment, if you will. So alongside other components, of course, you have environmental determinism, the racism that just seems to never die, modified as it is instead to apply, really kind of total reverse as a form of anti-white racial prejudice and stereotypes. But one can always hope, of course, that it will fade away eventually. But in the context of ancient history and colonial history, and really up until roughly the Reconstruction era, at least the 20th century, environmental determinism was still a driving force into the arguments and policies adopted at the time.